Welcome to the Deep Dive, the indispensable shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we are jumping straight into what I think is one of the most intellectually jarring and just personally relevant pieces of neuroscience from the last century. We're talking about Antonio Damasio's landmark work, Descartes' Error, Emotion, Reason, and the Human Brain. And this book, it's not just theory. It is a profound look at clinical evidence that really fundamentally rewrites the script on what we think of as human nature. So if you've ever found yourself just paralyzed by too many logical options, or if you believe, as our culture often tells us, that true rationality means shutting down your feelings, well, this deep dive is going to challenge that head on. Our source material today is a systematic unraveling of centuries of dualistic thinking. And it's delivered by a world-renowned neurologist who used these incredible patient cases to build his revolutionary thesis. So the mission today is pretty clear. We need to understand the intellectual error that Damasio identifies, explore the clinical evidence he gathered that proves feelings are necessary, and most importantly, connect all of this back to the decisions you make every single day. At the heart of this whole conversation is this powerful idea that reason is not some cold, separate operation. It's fundamentally rooted in the physical reality of the body. It's tied to feeling and emotion. In short, well, without emotion, reason fails. So, okay, let's unpack this.
It's vital to begin by just establishing the scale of the challenge Damasio undertook here. When we say Descartes' error, we're talking about an intellectual tradition that has shaped philosophy, medicine, psychology for centuries.
Right.
Damasio is aiming squarely at René Descartes, the 17th century philosopher who really formalized this concept of dualism. The error, as Damasio defines it, is this abyssal separation that Descartes proposed between the thinking substance, what he called the res cogitans, the mind, and the physical substance, the res extensa, the body and the brain.
And Descartes needed that separation, didn't he, for philosophical and religious reasons, to keep the soul pure.
Exactly. But in doing so, he set the foundation for treating the mind and body as if they were governed by totally separate mechanisms.
And that wasn't just some abstract problem for philosophers to debate. It had real-world consequences. This powerful metaphor was created. The mind is the software, pristine and independent, and the brain is just the hardware it runs on.
Yes. The idea that consciousness or high-level reason could function without the constraints, the influences, the messy feedback loop of the actual physical body.
Yeah.
And Damasio just argues this view is not only scientifically wrong, it's fundamentally backward, especially when you look at it from an evolutionary perspective. If we take Descartes' most famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," Damasio just flips it completely.
Yeah.
He suggests that being, the biological physical existence of an organism, that has to come before thinking.
We are first, and then we think.
Exactly. We are a functioning biological entity first, and then the structures and operations of that physical being generate thought. The self is an organism, not just a consciousness floating in a vacuum.
And the practical damage of that separation is just immense, especially in medicine.
Precisely. By separating the mind from the body, Western medicine has, for much of its history, focused almost exclusively on treating the body proper, the machine, and often completely neglecting the crucial role of the mind, of emotional life, in health and recovery. We fail to treat the human as a single integrated system. It's a point he comes back to again and again.
So, to challenge an idea that entrenched, you can't just offer a counter-philosophy. You need hard evidence. And Damasio starts his case not with, a fancy fMRI scan, but with a gruesome yet profoundly insightful historical story. It happened nearly 180 years ago. The story of Phineas P. Gage.
Phineas Gage is really the foundational pillar of Descartes' error. He provides the historical proof that high-level reasoning and social function depend entirely on specific brain structures, not just, generalized intellect. He was a construction foreman in 1848 in Vermont, responsible for a big crew laying railroad tracks.
And it's so important to stress who Gage was before the accident. The records paint this picture of an extraordinarily capable guy. He was described as vigorous, reliable, he had exceptional persistence, steady judgment. His employers even considered him the most efficient and capable man in their service. He was, by all accounts, the model of a rational, socially responsible, goal-oriented person.
And all of that stability was just destroyed in a single moment. On September 13th, 1848, Gage was preparing a blast. He was using a heavy tamping iron to pack gunpowder into a hole.
Right.
But the procedure was rushed, they'd forgotten the sand layer, and the iron sparked against the rock. The explosion propelled the tamping iron, this thick pointed bar, over 3 feet long, straight up.
And it went. It's a shocking image. Through his left cheek, behind his eye, right across the front of his brain, and out the top of his skull.
It is. And the miracle isn't just that he lived, but that he was immediately conscious and coherent. He walked, he spoke. When the doctor, John Harlow, got there, Gage was talking rationally, describing the event like it had happened to someone else.
So he'd suffered this massive, localized brain trauma, but he was still functionally alert.
That physical survival just masked this profound, almost immediate psychological collapse. Dr. Harlow documented everything. While Gage recovered physically, he could move, his sight was mostly okay, memory and language were intact, his entire personality was shattered.
He was, as they all noted, no longer Gage.
Right. He became erratic, profane, impatient, prone to these sudden rages, and completely disrespectful of social rules. And crucially, he lost the ability to follow any kind of long-term plan. He couldn't stick with a job. He'd make these impulsive, disastrous decisions that went directly against his own interests.
His steady judgment was just gone, replaced by this unpredictable capriciousness.
Exactly. And this paradox fascinated neurologists. Gage had kept his core intellectual abilities. His IQ, memory, motor skills were all fine. He could calculate, he could articulate, he could understand language, and yet he could not function socially or personally.
It was this dramatic suggestion that the part of the brain that had been destroyed was the essential bridge between pure intellect and successfully navigating life.
Yes, it showed that the ability to reason advantageously was physically localized in the brain.
But for decades, Gage's case was mostly just a curiosity, right? Because of the limits of 19th century science. No autopsy was performed when he died.
Right. But Dr. Harlow had the incredible foresight to preserve Gage's skull and the iron bar that caused the injury.
And that's where Damasio's team comes in, centuries later.
Yes, his wife Hannah Damasio, specifically. They took that preserved skull and the iron and used advanced 21st century neuroimaging, a technique called BrainVox, to reconstruct the exact path the iron took through his head. They could map the injury precisely onto a modern brain model.
And the findings were definitive.
Absolutely. The damage was isolated to the interior frontal lobes, specifically the bilateral ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or the VMFC. It's an area that sits right behind your eyes.
And crucially, the reconstruction confirmed that the areas for motor function and language production, like Broca's area, were completely spared.
Which perfectly explained why Gage kept his intellect, his memory, and his physical coordination. The injury wasn't generalized, it was highly specific.
So it established this first historical link between a specific brain region, the VMFC, and our ability to plan, anticipate consequences, and exercise steady judgment. But Gage's case was history. It was compelling, but it was limited. To really build a scientific thesis, Damasio needed a living subject who had a similar injury, someone he could test under modern experimental conditions. And this brings us to a modern Phineas Gage, the devastating story of a man named Elliot.
Elliot was the critical bridge. He connected that 19th century anomaly to modern neurobiology. He was an intelligent, successful professional, and his life just completely disintegrated after surgery to remove a benign tumor, a meningioma, that had compressed his frontal lobes.
So the surgery required removing damaged tissue, basically replicating the VMFC damage that Gage experienced.
Exactly. And the clinical picture was at first just baffling to his doctors. And it really reflects that Cartesian-biased Damasio was fighting. Physically, Elliot looked fine. Intellectually, he seemed flawless.
He scored in the superior range on IQ tests. Memory and perception were perfect. He even performed normally on standard tests of pure reasoning, like the Wisconsin card sorting test, which measures cognitive flexibility.
His doctors initially denied he had an organic brain syndrome because they couldn't find a pure intellectual deficit. And yet, Elliot's life was an utter catastrophe.
He couldn't hold a job, he couldn't manage his savings, he couldn't prioritize anything. He'd become obsessed with trivial details, like spending an entire afternoon deciding whether to file a document in a blue folder or a red folder.
Or debating which radio station to tune into. He would just lose sight of the actual goal, which was managing his business. He was just lost in the weeds of possibility.
It's just a profound human tragedy, that contrast. A man with a superior intellect who was functionally destroyed by an inability to prioritize, to organize, to just get things done.
And Damasio's team found that Elliot could endlessly articulate options. He could predict the likely consequences of any social or ethical dilemma you gave him. He could verbalize effective ways to achieve goals. But when you asked him to choose one,
He was paralyzed.
completely paralyzed by the equivalence of all the logical outcomes.
He knew it was right, he knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't generate the motivational signal to actually act on that knowledge. And that leads to this just devastating quote he gave.
I would see myself as a dispassionate spectator, and after all this, I still wouldn't know what to do.
Wow, dispassionate spectator.
That phrase was the key. Damasio realized that Eliot was experiencing profound emotional flatness. He would recount the loss of his career, his bankruptcy, his divorce, with total detachment. He could describe the facts of his tragedy without any anxiety, suffering, or shame about his future.
So how do you quantify that? How do you measure emotional flatness in a lab? This is where Damasio used the skin conductance response, or SCR.
The SCR measures tiny changes in the electrical conductivity of the skin. It's a highly reliable measure of autonomic nervous system activity, the physical manifestation of an emotional response. It's often just subtle, subconscious sweating.
Like the physiological equivalent of a jump scare or a feeling of anxiety?
Exactly. The experiment involved showing Eliot and some control subjects a series of slides. They ranged from, benign landscapes to profoundly disturbing scenes of disaster, injury, and violence.
In normal subjects.
Normal subjects generated significant, immediate SCRs. Their bodies reacted when they saw the disturbing images. Their autonomic nervous system sent an alarm signal.
But Eliot's recordings were flat.
Completely flat. Zero physiological response. He could analyze the horror of the images perfectly, but his body registered no alarm. The crucial neural link between factual knowledge and emotional feeling was just severed.
And he even said it himself, right? That he knew the images should be disturbing, but he just felt nothing.
Exactly. And this confirmed the central thesis. The brain damage, the VMFC, it didn't impair Eliot's pure logic or memory or language. It destroyed the crucial mechanism required to link intellectual deliberation to feeling. And without that feeling, reason becomes rudderless. It's incapable of selecting advantageous actions.
Okay, so this is where it gets really, really interesting. We move from the clinical observation of what's broken to the theory of how it's supposed to work. If pure high reason failed Gage and Eliot, what is the indispensable mechanism that normally steers us? This leads us straight to the somatic marker hypothesis.
Right. Traditional models of decision-making, the high reason model, suggest that to make the best choice, we should calculate the utility of every outcome, a rigorous, comprehensive cost-benefit analysis.
Which sounds great in a textbook.
But Damasio argues this is simply impossible for the personal and social domains, which are just inherently complex and saturated with uncertainty.
And if we tried to do that rigorous analysis for every little decision, we'd run into our own biological limits. We would be hopelessly slow.
Exactly. Our working memory and our attention capacity are limited. If you try to hold every possible consequence of every single option in your mind, you'd experience what we now call cognitive overload. You'd stall. Or, like Eliot, you'd get paralyzed, just endlessly generating options. The system is too slow for the demands of survival.
So pure reason needs an emotional co-pilot. It needs a cognitive shortcut that reduces the decision space before deliberation even really begins.
And that shortcut is the somatic marker hypothesis. Somatic marker is an automated, body-based signal, a physiological state that's either pleasant or unpleasant. These signals are triggered when your brain quickly anticipates the consequences of a potential action.
So it's the body's alarm system or its incentive system.
It is. It's the knot in your stomach when you think about a risky investment or that rush of excitement when you see an opportunity. Those are somatic markers. They are what he calls dispositional representations, learned through experience. They connect specific situations, like a high-risk gamble, with specific somatic states, like the feeling of anxiety. The marker forces your immediate attention onto a potential negative outcome. It's basically saying, warning, previous experience suggests pain here.
And it's important to say the function isn't to replace reason, it's to assist it. It's a fast filter.
Right. The marker instantly reduces the number of alternatives, biasing your rational system toward options with a positive marker and away from options with a negative one. Your rational brain can then focus its limited resources on comparing a manageable few remaining options.
So to test this hypothesis in real time, Antoine Bachara, who was working with Damasio, designed the now famous Iowa gambling task.
Yes, this experiment forces subjects to learn the long-term consequences of risk, just like you have to do in real life.
Let's detail the setup, because its brilliance is in its simplicity.
Subjects choose cards from 4 different decks, A, B, C, and D. Decks A and B are the high-risk, high-reward decks. They give a big immediate payout, say $100 per card, but they're riddled with these catastrophic, unpredictable penalties, like losing $1,250 in a single draw.
So over time, choosing from A and B guarantees you go bankrupt.
Guaranteed. Decks C and D are the low-risk, low-reward decks. They offer smaller payouts, say $50 a card, but they only have small penalties. Over time, C&D lead to reliable profit.
It perfectly models that real-world conflict, the temptation of the immediate big reward versus the necessity of long-term stability.
And the normal healthy players, the control group, they show this remarkable adaptive behavior. Initially, they're tempted by A and B, but they quickly switch. And even before they can consciously articulate why A and B are bad, they develop a hunch and they start to gravitate towards the safe decks, C and D. And they end up making profit.
But the patients with VMFC damage, the Elliott group, they failed catastrophically.
Systematically. They preferred the high-risk decks, A and B, despite accruing these mounting losses and rapidly heading towards bankruptcy. They were controlled entirely by the immediate prospect of that $100 reward.
Damasio called it myopia for the future.
Exactly. They knew the rules, but they couldn't apply the past consequence of loss to their future prediction of risk.
But the crucial evidence wasn't just the final score, it was the timing of their physiological response. They hooked everyone up to the SCR monitors during the game.
Right. And they observed two types of responses, reactive and anticipatory. Now, both normal subjects and the frontal lobe patients showed SCRs after they won or lost money. They reacted to the immediate reward or punishment.
Okay, so they still had a reaction to the event itself.
Yes. But when the normal subjects began to develop their hunch, about 40 or 50 trials into the game, they started generating SCRs before they even reached for a card from the bad decks, A or B.
Wow.
Their bodies were signaling danger, a somatic warning, before their conscious minds had even fully formed the rational strategy.
And the VMFC patients?
This is the critical finding. The VMFC patients showed no anticipatory responses. They might react to the loss after it happened, but they failed to generate that crucial warning signal required to predict a negative future outcome. Their brain was failing to retrieve that coded memory of past pain and signal it to the body.
So without that automated alarm, they just couldn't learn to avoid the catastrophic decks.
It's an explicit connection. The logical calculation was insufficient because the body wasn't providing the emotional bias required to steer attention away from the risk.
I have a critical question here, though. If intuition is just a body signal, how do we distinguish between a useful somatic marker, a learned warning, and, just irrelevant anxiety or fear that might paralyze us from taking a necessary risk?
That's a fundamental question, and it speaks to the sophistication of the system. See, somatic markers are not raw instinct. They are acquired through experience and learning within specific social contexts. A healthy system uses reason to vet the markers. If an option feels bad, the marker makes you pause, but your prefrontal cortex still has to deliberate. Is this feeling based on a real threat, like a bad debt, or an irrelevant fear, like public speaking?
Right.
Gage and Elliott couldn't even get to that second step because the initial pause signal was absent. The marker forces the critical reflection.
That makes so much sense. It's not just the signal, it's the dialogue between the signal and reason. And this mechanism, the marker, often operates without us even being fully conscious of it. This brings us to the as-if loop.
Yes, which is where the speed and efficiency truly come in. The standard, slower process is the body loop. The brain sends a signal to the body changes, heart races, palms sweat, and then the brain reads that change to create the conscious feeling of anxiety.
The as-if loop is the brain's internal simulation.
Precisely. To save time and energy, the brain can skip the full physical enactment. It simulates the body state entirely within the somatosensory regions of the cortex. It activates the internal representation of the danger signal without actually making the heart race fully.
So it's like running a quick, silent rehearsal of the outcome.
Exactly. And this allows markers to operate covertly or non-consciously via what Damasio calls biasing signals. This covert mechanism is what we subjectively experience as intuition, arriving at a solution or avoiding a danger without having explicitly gone through the laborious logical calculation. The body's physiological history is providing the answer.
So if thinking requires feeling, and the body provides the foundation for those feelings, we have to transition to the broader implications. What does this all mean for society, for how we educate, govern, and heal? What stands out to you in terms of the big picture relevance?
I think what stands out is the mandate to just discard the Cartesian illusion of the mind as a brain in a vat. Damasio insists that the mind derives from the entire organism. The body is the ground reference for consciousness.
He has this really powerful image for it. If the body were removed, the mind wouldn't exist in its current form because the body provides the bedrock of the sense of being alive. It provides this continuous map of the organism's current state, which is necessary for all subsequent thought and memory.
It's the constant dynamic background against which we construct our representations of the external world. And this continuous background map is the biological basis of the self.
Right. He rejects the idea of a fixed little person running the show inside our heads.
He does. In favor of the self being a repeatedly reconstructed biological state. Our sense of self relies on two continuities: our autobiographical memory, the facts of our identity, and these primordial body representations, the ongoing background feelings that define our current condition. If you lose access to the latter, like Eliot did, the sense of self becomes detached and spectator-like.
It's fascinating how this biological necessity translates all the way up to our highest level behaviors. It means our social conduct, our ethics, our morality, they all have to be biologically grounded.
Exactly. The structures governing basic biological regulation, the brainstem, the hypothalamus, they're the lowest levels of the brain, and they maintain direct relationships with the body. Damasio shows that these structures are intrinsically intertwined with the highest reaches of reasoning.
So high-level strategies like knowing how to behave ethically are neurophysiologically interwoven with our innate drives and instincts.
The biological levers for survival, pain, and pleasure occur when the brain plots a significant deviation in the body's state. So the ethical system we construct is constrained by and built upon this fundamental wiring. If you break that foundation, as the VMFC damage does, the highest functions of personal and social conduct just collapse.
This deep integration has enormous practical implications. And the final part of Descartes' error suggests specific use cases where this mind-body integration needs to be reestablished. Let's start with the most obvious one: medicine.
The Cartesian neglect, this insistence on treating the body as a machine separate from the emotional mind, has absolutely crippled medical practice. When a patient presents with a disease, say cancer or chronic pain, traditional medicine often focuses exclusively on the cellular and mechanical repair,
And ignores the massive psychological fallout of the disease.
and vice versa. It ignores the bodily consequences of psychological conflict. We know that chronic stress or depression can compromise the immune system, increase inflammation, exacerbate chronic conditions, yet the traditional model often lacks the framework to treat the organism as a whole system.
It's dehumanizing.
It is, and Damasio views the rise of alternative and holistic medicine as a direct symptom of public dissatisfaction with this reductionist model that fails to address the feeling element, the suffering, and the self. We should reintegrate the body and mind in practice, not just in theory.
Moving beyond healthcare, how does this affect our approach to education? If reason is guided by feeling, how should we be teaching?
It requires a fundamental shift. If the goal is truly rational decision-making, then educational systems should specifically emphasize the relationship between current emotional states, somatic markers, and future outcomes. It's not enough to just teach logic. We need to teach emotional literacy and regulation as a tool for rationality.
So we should be training people how to interpret their own somatic markers, how to distinguish between, say, the necessary discomfort of learning a hard skill and the somatic warning against a catastrophic choice.
Precisely. Education needs to help students build stronger, more reliable dispositional knowledge, that vast library of coded experiences. This means moving the focus from just rote learning of rules to the development of self-monitoring and anticipatory behavior, which is essential for thriving in a complex world.
And that has huge implications for our current environment, which is just saturated with media. Damasio specifically touches on social behavior and violence.
He does. He argues that the VMFC is essential for social appropriateness. If that region is damaged, you become impulsive and you disregard social norms. When a society is constantly exposed to vicarious violence in media, but that violence is presented without a corresponding moral framework or emotional consequence,
When it's stylized or sanitized or just repeated until it's banal.
it risks desensitizing the necessary feelings required for adaptive social behavior. You risk blunting the somatic marker warning. If the body's alarm system stops triggering when confronted with simulated aggression or suffering, you're essentially training the VMFC to fail.
And there's a biological basis for this.
Yes, the book notes that serotonin depletion in the VMFC and amygdala correlates directly with impulsive and aggressive behavior. The pathway connecting the experience of distress to the regulation of social impulses is neurochemically fragile.
Finally, Damasio offers this really profound caution about alleviating suffering, which ties back to the healthcare discussion. He makes a crucial distinction between two different processes.
He distinguishes between pain, which is the purely somatosensory image of tissue damage, the factual signal, and suffering, which is the emotional psychological feeling that follows the perception of pain. They are distinct neural processes.
This is shown so clearly by that clinical case of the patient who had a modified prefrontal leucotomy for intractable pain.
That patient provided the proof. After the surgery, they reported that the physical intensity and location of the pain signals were exactly the same. The pains are the same, yet they were completely relaxed and said they were no longer suffering.
The surgery abolished the emotional reaction to the pain, the suffering, while leaving the sensory image, the pain signal itself, intact.
They felt the signal, but they didn't feel distressed about the signal. It's a profound insight.
But that insight leads to his final caution.
It does. We have to be highly wary of the modern tendency to use drugs or treatments to eliminate all social and personal discomfort. While alleviating true, debilitating suffering is critical, if we eliminate every negative feeling, every stressor, every anxiety, we risk treating the symptom but ignoring the necessary roots of the conflict.
Because some discomfort is the essential signal you need for learning and adaptation. If you remove the feeling of unease that comes with debt, for example, you remove the somatic marker that will guide you toward financial responsibility next time.
Exactly. Damasio reminds us that many of the emotions we find uncomfortable, shame, guilt, anxiety about failure, are the very mechanisms society has evolved to ensure we make advantageous choices and adhere to ethical standards. Complete emotional detachment, as we saw in Eliot, leads only to self-destruction. So to summarize the core insight of this entire deep dive, Damasio, through rigorous clinical observation, proves conclusively that feelings are not just irrational baggage. They're not a hindrance to reason. They are, in fact, an indispensable biological foundation and a powerful influence upon it, especially when things are complex and uncertain.
The key takeaway for you, the listener, is that if you want to be truly rational and effective in navigating your life, you have to be attentive to your own body and your own emotional state. That knot in your stomach, that rush of heat, that is not a witness. That's your intuition. It's your physiological co-pilot operating covertly, guiding you away from catastrophe and toward beneficial choices. Damasio closes his book by quoting William Faulkner, suggesting that neurobiology, like poetry, should help humans endure and prevail by addressing the human heart in conflict with itself. So, if feelings are the indispensable key to effective decision-making, and our modern culture constantly urges us toward detachment, what crucial moral or ethical conflicts are we neglecting today by choosing emotional numbness over difficult, necessary emotional engagement? It's something to deeply consider the next time your body sends you a warning signal.